This is Michael Park for CreativeCow.net. Here's what we'll be creating. As you can see, it's actually a very simple, straightforward looking shot, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. First thing you'll notice are the 3D pellets coming at the camera. Second thing you'll probably notice is the distortion trails following the pellets. Those will both be done in 3D Max. Next you'll see the kind of the muzzle flash, which is just a small explosion placed over top and sized correctly. And then you'll see the smoke effects. Next you'll see the ripple distortion effect as the concussion wave going out. And then you'll also see we color corrected the shot a little bit and also added a vignette. And finally we played with the time so that it kind of slows down in the middle and is faster at the front and the back of the clip, just to give it a little more visual interest. The original shot we had was shot in real time on just a standard camcorder, and I took it into After Effects and slowed it down to 20% of its actual speed to get kind of the slow-mo version, and this is what I came up with. And as you can see, the shot gets some distortion right here in the middle where the motion blur on the barrel kind of messes up. In this shot that's not that big of a deal, simply because we're going to have distortion over top that area right there anyway, and it's just kind of going to add to the realism of the shot. In other shots you might want to be a little more careful or use some sort of high-speed camera if you have one, because you might have a little problem with After Effects interpolating the pixel motion there. Okay, so part 1 is going to be focusing on the 3D aspects of the shot. Part 2 will focus on the After Effects composition. So we'll go ahead and get out of After Effects and load up 3D Max. Here we are in the 3D Max interface. Hopefully this will be familiar for some of you. And what we're going to be doing now is, from a conceptual standpoint, is creating a pellet and then a trail particle. We're going to use particle flow to generate the particles and control the velocity and the position and all those other attributes. And we're also going to go ahead and map the particles. First thing you probably need to do is start off with a good reference shot, and this is kind of the shot we're going for of the type of pellet we're looking for. As you can see, it's kind of a light and dark gray mottled. It's got some indentations and some texture. It also has a slight reflective nature to it, and it has a high glossy specular and a little bit of blue around it. So we're going to be using Max's material editor to create this look. First thing I'm going to do is come in here and create the background image so we can position everything appropriately. I'm going to go to the Create panel and start with a new plane. And I'm going to turn on the 3D snaps, and what I'm going to do is come in here and basically center this plane over top. I'm going to turn on edged faces, and I'm going to resize this so that it's going to be 90 by 160. The reason I'm doing this is obviously I'm using a widescreen camera, and I want the plane to be widescreen because we're going to be applying our footage to it. Second thing I want to do is create a camera to match this. I'm going to come in here to the render settings and change this to a 720p render setting, 1280 by 720, so that the aspect ratio is correct when we create our camera. You can change it later, it's just easier to do it this way in my opinion. Create a target camera and line it up directly with your footage. It looks like this is a little bit too big right now, so we're going to come in here to the move tool, turn off the snaps, and we're going to bring the camera in so it just matches the aspect ratio of our footage. I think that's going to be close enough. Doesn't have to be dead on for this shot. As you can see, in our camera view, everything's looking good. Next thing you're going to want to do is file up the material editor, and here we go. We're going to start. We need the background footage, so go to your diffuse, go to bitmap, and choose your background footage. Next thing you want to do is set this to show map and viewport, and you want to turn the self-illumination all the way up so you can see it. Select your plane geometry, and I always like to name this to keep things straight, and go ahead and apply your background footage and it should show up. Next thing we want to do is create our bullet, or our pellet as I'll call it. So you go back to the standard primitives, create a new geosphere. Doesn't matter what size it is, we're going to manually input that anyway. I'm going to call this pellet and keep it straight. The radius is going to be 0.3. Segments 4 is fine. Icosahedron is fine. Go to the modify panel and I'm going to turn on a turbo smooth to make it nice and round. These are going to be pretty up close shots on the camera. So we have our pellet. Now we need to make a material for it. Once again, we're using this as a reference, so let's go ahead and build our material so that it looks like this. Select the next material, rename this pellet, go to your diffuse, we're going to put in a noise map, and as you can see it kind of creates a modeled texture. We're going to adjust some of these settings. The size we're going to drop to 2. We're going to change the noise type to turbulence. You can see it's already starting to look a little better. And since our pellet was kind of a light gray and a dark gray, we're going to change these to a red, green, blue, or RGB value of 40, 40, 40. And the light gray, the white's going to go light gray, and it's going to go 160, 160, 160. And that looks good. Go back up. I'm going to turn on show map and viewport, and we're going to adjust some of these. Right now what we have is basically the right colors, but they're all flat. There's no specular level to them. If you recall on the original, the specular there was kind of a light blue, so we're going to change that. The specular color, we're going to go to 180 and 195 and 250 for kind of a light blue. And we're going to really make this a hot specular, so we're going to go up to about 200, and the glossiness will try about 30. Okay, so it's looking alright so far, but as you can see there's definitely a difference. This is very, very smooth, and this is kind of mottled and dented, so we need to change that. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a bump map. Go ahead and drag and drop the map as an instance to bump, and you can already see it's doing a good job. 30 looks good. The only other thing we're probably going to need to do is there's some reflection on the original, as you can tell, since it's metal or metallic, and so we're going to have to recreate that. I'm going to simulate it by using the original footage that we had. This is a great way to do it simply because all the colors are going to match the shot, and it's going to look it's going to have movement to it. It's going to look like it belongs in the shot better. I'm going to go ahead and change the or dial down the reflection from 100 to about 20. It's going to change depending on your shot and where you are and the lighting conditions, but for us this I think is going to look pretty good. Go ahead and apply that material to your geometry. I'm going to kind of come in and take a look, and we'll do a quick test render here. I'm going to turn the rendering down a bit so we can keep it in the window. And here's what we get, and here's our original. The bump mapping might be a hair big compared to the original, but I kind of like it. I think it looks good. If you want to, you can adjust it to your own taste. I'll show you what that kind of looks like. You go into your diffuse color, your bump map, set a 2, maybe change it down to 1. Since you've instanced that for your bump map, it automatically updates the other one, and now all you need to do is render it back out, and there you go. Actually, I think that looks better. We'll stick with 1. There we go, and we have our pellet done. Next thing we want to do is create the particle for the trails. It's basically the exact same thing. We're going to use a geosphere. We're going to drag it out. We're going to make it the same size, about 0.3. We don't need all the segments, so we're going to change that to 1. That'll save you render time later on because there's going to be a lot of these. And I'm going to go ahead and apply a turbo smooth to this, and as you can see it's a lot lower resolution. That's going to be important when it comes to render times for rendering out the trails. Now we go to kind of part B of part 1 here. We've got our geometry, we've got our background plane, and now what we need to do is actually go to particle flow and generate some particles coming out at the camera. So go ahead and close down the material editor, go back into your create panel, drop down your particle systems and go to your particle flow source. And we're going to go into the front viewport and create a particle flow source. We're going to maximize this viewport because we want to kind of zoom in here and position the particle flow center right over top of kind of this top barrel, which is where I'm going to have the particles emit, and we'll line it up right there. If you look in the top viewport, we'll just go ahead, you can see that the particle emitter is pointing backwards from where the camera is. That's bad because unless we have a backfiring shotgun, it's not going to be the right look. So we're going to turn on the rotation, and I'm going to turn on the rotation snaps right here. That's 3D snap, and just rotate it 180 degrees. Later on we'll fine-tune the rotation of it to direct the particles exactly where we want to go, but for right now this is good. Now go to the modify panel and hit the particle view, and instantly you'll have this dialog box here, and what this does is allow us to control all the particles. I'm going to go ahead and start renaming this stuff so I keep it straight. It's a good practice to get into, even though this isn't that complicated of a shot. Later on this will save your rear end if you're looking for stuff. Rename this to pellets because we're actually going to have another one of these events below this driven off this pellet event, which will be the trails. The berth controls what frames that the particles will emit from, and if you look at it right now, the emitter starting at frame 0 and stopping at frame 30, their mount is 200. So over the 30 frames it's going to emit 200 particles, and if you look at the camera you can tell they're all coming at the camera. We don't want that. It's one shotgun blast, so we want it to start and stop on one frame. What you need to do is scrub through your footage and you'll be able to tell when that shotgun starts going up, and you want it basically 1 or 2 frames before then. And if you look at the front viewport here, the gun starts going up right around 2022. So I think I'm going to have our particles emit on frame 20. So come in here and change this to 20 and 20 for start and stop, and I want really about 24 particles. And some other shotgun shells, if you have smaller like birdshot or buckshot, it's going to change depending on the size of your particles or your pellets. I'm going to use about 24 for what we got going on now. Position icon, the only thing we want to change here is instead of volume you want it pivot, because you want all the rounds to come out of the same point, which is the pivot point of the particle flow emitter. Speed, you want to change this. Basically the look I want is for all the particles to come out and basically be past or right at the camera at the final frame. So I'm going to go to the last frame and increase the speed until the particles all come out and hit the camera. Other thing I'm going to do is, if you can tell, there's only one particle here, or it looks like it's only one particle. Those are actually 24 particles, and they're all traveling the same speed and the same towards the same place. What I'm going to do is change the variation in speed to about 3%, and as you can see, it breaks that up a little bit. And the other thing I'm going to do is change the divergence, which is how closely they're clustered, the spread basically, to something a little bigger. I'm going to go maybe about 4. And so now is probably a good time to come in and adjust the rotation of the particle emitter so that it lines up better with the camera. I'm going to dial the divergence back down to 0, and I'm going to align these particles directly with the camera. So come in here, turn off the snaps for rotation, select the particle emitter, and basically rotate it down and over so it's lined right up the camera. And you can see it's coming right at us. If you need to really fine tune it, you can come in here and adjust these a little bit. USB. Got to go the other way, 1.4 maybe. That looks good. And now we can bring our divergence back up, and as you can see, the particles spread out a bit. We'll go 2.5. Next thing we're going to do is change the rotation. I'm going to change this to spin because you don't have any control over the rotation right now. It kind of rotates as it wants to. You can come down here and take spin and change the rotation to spin by basically dragging and dropping over top so it's a red line. It'll substitute spin for rotation. And I'm going to change the spin rate down to something lower, like 30, and change the variation to about 15% and leave random 3D on. I'm going to just give us a new uniqueness so that if you do the same shot at a different time, you're not going to have the exact same rotation. Next thing we're going to do is change the shape. And the shape by default is tetra, and it's kind of these generic shapes of vertex, tetra, cube, or sphere. We actually have made geometry we want to use, and so we're going to have to change this from shape to shape instance. So we're going to come down here to shape instance, once again drag and drop over top and it changes it. We're going to pick the geometry, which is our pellet, and now if you come down here to display, you can change the display from ticks to geometry, and as you can see, you have the actual pellets flying at you now. They don't quite get to the camera, so I'm going to go back to speed, and I'm going to adjust the speed up because I want them all basically to get almost by the camera or right about there. And that looks pretty good. We can back it down and do a quick render here and see what we've got. So far we've got our balls coming at the camera. You can basically go in and adjust the lighting settings if you want. I'm using the default 3D Max lights just because it's easier and because the sun was coming from that direction that day anyway, as you can see from the reflection. So it works out well for me. The only thing you might want to do is come up to the environment panel, and you can actually change the ambient, make it a little brighter, and then re-render that and see what that looks like, and it makes the shells a lot lighter. And as you can see, the pellets kind of show up a little bit better and blend in the background a little bit better with the lighting conditions, not quite such of a dark shadow. You can actually maybe even bring it up a hair more. I think that looks pretty good. Next thing we might want to do though is for a little more realism is turn on motion blur. The way you do this is you come in here and turn the top part of this box white, right click and hit properties, come down here and turn on motion blur, hit OK, and then if you render again, you've got a nice motion blur effect going on. I think it looks really good. So now we need to go ahead and do the trails portion. So we're going to go add a spawn event. What this will do is this will kick out particles off of our particles, and we'll go by second. And what we want to do is create a new event, so we're going to go shape instance, drag that out. And we're going to link up these two, and we're going to use the shape instance like before, and this time we're going to choose the what's called Geosphere 1, which we're going to rename Trail. And let's see, spawn, we're going to have a rate of about 25 a second, and we're going to have offspring of we'll say about 8 and a variation of about 20. And we want to go down here, and the speed inheritance, we don't want it to be the same speed as the parent, which is the shotgun particles or the pellets. So we want them to move forward but not real fast. So we'll do about 10%, and we'll also change the divergence to I will leave it at we'll change it to about 30. Okay, and we'll take a look, and if you look in our viewport, you can see how now we have all of these coming off the pellets, and that'll give us our distortion effect. And if you want to see the actual geometry, it'll, depending on how fast your computer is, you might be able to get away with it. You can change it from ticks to geometry, and you can see here in the particle view, there we go. Now if you render out a quick frame of that, see we've got all those spawning off. And that's what we'll use to create our distortion effect. So now the only thing we need to do is render these passes out. You don't need to put motion blur onto the particle trails, because we're going to be blurring them out in After Effects anyway, and it'll severely limit your rendering. So you want to render these out in 2 passes. The first pass you want to do is render out the actual pellets. So come in and turn off the spawn and go to your render and do your active time segment. Hide whatever you're going to do. I'm going to go 1280 by 720, and then render output. I'm going to put mine into my folder, elements and pellets. I'm going to name it pellet. I like to use PNG, just a personal preference. You can use anything with a good alpha channel. That looks good. And off you go. Actually, this reminds me, you want to turn off your background, your background plane, or else it'll render that out as well. And we don't want to see that. We're just using that as a reference. So right click when you have it selected, Object Properties, click Renderable, and turn that off. And then go ahead and make sure you have your camera selected and render it out. I'm going to pause it while this renders. Alright, now that's had time to render, and we need to render out our trails, so we're going to come up here, go back to the particle view, turn the spawn back on, and we're going to actually turn off the pellets here. What you want to do is go up here, select the pellets, right click, hit the properties, and turn off the renderability. And what that'll do is allow you to render your trails without having to render your pellets out. So then simply come up and choose your output like we did before. Select a new folder for your trails, render it out, and you'll have both your pellets and your trails ready to go for the next step. Well, thank you for watching this portion of the video tutorial, and I'll see you in step 2 to bring this into After Effects and put it all together.